All right. Starting with the outline, and we got a couple things we're going to cover pertaining to economic growth. Okay. We did not. So this was, the biggest question of the whole semester is what happened to Unit 6, right? Because we go from Unit 5 to Unit 7. This is Unit 6. It has to do with economic growth. So we'll cover just a couple important things about economic growth right now that we covered during the semester. We just didn't cover it as its own unit. Okay. So first, let's put down here. We'll start with the causes. The causes of growth. Okay? So I think the first thing that's important for us to know, main causes are any change in land, labor, capital. Land, labor, capital. Just remember that those are the determinants for what what establishes our potential in the economy. Okay, this would be like your determinants for your LRAS. So a couple things that I think we're gonna put down here as little maybe examples that seem to show up a decent amount. First would be an increase in investment spending. So remember, investment spending, that is business spending, okay? And the significance of investment spending is when we have an increase in investment spending, it's increasing what we call our capital stock. Capital stock, okay? Capital stock is just a fancy econ word or term for the amount of capital available in the economy, okay? So we talk about land, labor, capital, right? Those are our resources that are available. Capital stock is just the amount of capital. As we increase the capital stock, we're going to increase our potential, okay? So investment spending is spending on capital equipment. So those two things go together. Now we really need to add to this though, that what drives investment spending is low interest rates, okay? So I'm going to add in front of here a decrease in interest rates allow more investment spending to happen. If you're a business owner, you love low interest rates because that means you can borrow money for cheap, right? And that borrowed money that you have now, you're going to use to spend on capital equipment. So I think that connection right there is super important for causing growth. It seems to show up almost every single year in some way, shape, or form, okay? Sometimes on FRQs, and whenever you're asked about how economic growth or investment spending is going to change on an FRQ, you always need to find the interest rate. Figure out what's happening with the interest rate in that question, and then that will drive the investment spending or the growth. Low interest rates, more investment spending, more growth. High interest rates slows everything down. Okay? So I think that's important for us to know. Next thing that seems to show up a lot about cause of growth would be an increase in technology. I think it's just important to know that when we have better technology, what we say a lot of times is it increases our labor productivity. And all that is fancy for, we're increasing the capability of all of our workers in the economy. That's why we're able to help our economy grow. Okay? Increase in technology. And then the other thing that shows up a decent amount is an increase in human capital. And remember, human capital is just your knowledge, your experience, your education. Okay, that's what you would, or how you would define human capital. And again, that does the same thing. It increases labor productivity when we have more human capital. So if we find a way, if our government is paying for, every person in the United States to go to college or to get additional schooling, then the theory behind that would be we're increasing all of our human capital, so then we should be able to produce more stuff down the road. Okay? I'm not saying that that would necessarily work, but that would be the theory behind it. Increasing labor productivity. Questions on any of that stuff? All right. Perfect. Moving on, number 2, let's talk about the impact. Impact of growth. First of all, when we're graphing growth, there's 2 ways we can graph growth. Graph growth? Wow. One is we can, we'll say LRAS, shift right. Oops. Shift the LRAS to the right, and that's going to be an increase in growth. Okay? The other would be on our production possibility graph, and we would shift, even though it's still right, a lot of times with the production possibility graph, we say we shift it outward. We'd shift it outward or right. Both of those are examples of how we would graph an increase in growth. Okay? And the only way that that happens is if we have more investment spending, more labor productivity, more human capital, things like that. Okay? And then statistically, a lot of times when we're talking about growth, we're really referring to an increase in real GDP per capita, which is just fancy for real GDP per person. That's what we're really looking to increase to show growth. All of our workers now can produce more stuff, so our potential is increasing. Okay, that would be like the main statistic that shows growth. Questions on any of that stuff? There you go. That was Unit 6 in a nutshell. All right, rolling on. Can I move it? I'm moving it. All right, now we're down to Unit 7. We're going to start with, I'm going to quickly go through a comparative advantage and terms of trade problem. I didn't do this the other day, so we're going to start with comparative advantage. Okay? Now remember, comparative advantage means that you are able to produce something at the lowest cost. Lowest cost always wins and determines comparative advantage. So let's go through a little example. We're not going to use you tonight, Low-I. Sorry. Let's say we have 2 countries. We've got the U.S. and China. And they can produce 2 goods. They can produce cars and trucks. Okay, yeah. And we'll say in the U.S. we can produce 5 cars or 10 trucks. 5 cars or 10 trucks. Is that too small for you guys in the back? You see that, Brandon? Way to go, man. All right, and in China, they can produce 2 cars or 8 trucks. 2 cars or 8 trucks. So I just need to, now we're saying this is an output problem. Output, other, over, right? Oh, yeah. Like the Kool-Aid guy. Thank you, Brock Walker, for helping out with that. Kool-Aid guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see? Oh, yeah. So output, other, over. So in the U.S., 1 car equals other, over, which is going to be 2 trucks, and 1 truck would be 1/2 car. And in China, 1 car would be 4 trucks, and 1 truck would be 1/4 car. So those are our costs right there. Okay, we have calculated the costs. I focused on each country first, and now I'm going to compare goods. Lowest cost always wins. So that means that the U.S. should produce cars. And if the U.S. is going to produce or has the comparative advantage in cars, then China must have the comparative advantage in trucks. Okay? Now, when we're talking about, so now we've established comparative advantage. Now let's talk about trade. Okay? When we are talking about trade, I'm just going to pick on the countries that have the comparative advantage. That's all I'm going to focus on in what they have the comparative advantage in. Okay? So I'm going to put that the U.S. needs more than 2 trucks. Now, how do I know that? I know that because the U.S. has the comparative advantage in cars. So they're going to trade a car, but they need more than their own cost. Okay? So I'm going to put the same thing down for China. And I'm going to say China, they're producing trucks, so they need more than a quarter car. Okay? So we'll put down China needs more than 1/4 car. So that's what I'm going to use to evaluate my trade. Okay, and let's just say that my possible trade, we'll say 1 car for 3 trucks. That's the proposed trade. We want to know, does that trade work? Okay? So first, I'm going to start with the U.S. because I know that the U.S. has cars because that's what they have the comparative advantage in. And the U.S. is going to trade a car and needs more than 2 trucks. So the trade has to always be greater than the cost. That's what I'm comparing, the trade to the cost. Okay? Well, 3 trucks is greater than 2. That was the cost. So the U.S. would agree to that trade. So I'll put a little check. Bada boom, bada bing. U.S. agrees. Now, this trade, here's where I think life gets a little tricky. Okay? This trade is the equivalent to, say, or 1 truck for 1/3 car. That's the same trade. Okay? 1 car for 3 trucks is the same as 1 truck for 1/3 car. Okay? Now I can compare that second variation or version of the trade to China. China needs more than a 1/4 car. In this trade, China's going to get 1/3 of a car. So that 1/3 is greater than 1/4. So that would also work. So that trade would be advantageous to both countries or both individuals. Because both individuals or both countries are gaining more from the trade than what their own cost is. That's what you're comparing. The trade and what they're getting to the cost. Okay? Questions on that at all? Yes, Ian.
So if it was like 1 trade or 1 car for 2 trucks, the U.S. wouldn't like it because it's the same?
Correct. 1 car for 2 trucks, U.S. would not agree because they're not benefiting from it. Okay? It's got to be more than. Great question. All right. Moving on. Let's talk about trade barriers and trade agreements. All right, now, I think it's important for us to know real quick what our trade barriers are, okay? So 3 examples of trade barriers would be a tariff, a quota, or an embargo. Okay? And in our world, they really all do the same thing. They all limit trade. Okay? They all limit trade. And an economist would say that for the most part they are negative. Okay? And we would say that they're negative because 1, they make an economy less efficient. So we'll say we are less efficient. And here's the reason why. When we are allowed to engage in free trade, countries are able to determine what they have the comparative advantage in and then trade freely with what they don't have the comparative advantage in. As soon as we implement trade barriers, like a tariff or a quota, okay, now we're going to make it so maybe, there's a country out there that has a comparative advantage in coffee, let's say, but now we've got to pay extra to import that because of the tariff. And so now maybe it's not worth it for us to buy the coffee from that other country because of that tariff. So now we're forced to produce something on our own that we don't have the comparative advantage in, which ultimately is going to be less efficient. We're going to waste resources trying to make coffee because we can't trade for it anymore for what we could or when it was free trade. Okay? So trade barriers limit efficiency. Okay? We don't like that. I would also say that trade barriers generally result in higher prices. Because there will be less competition. Less competition means less choices. Less choices means that producers, don't have to cut their prices and their costs as much, and so they can get away with keeping their prices higher. Okay? So higher prices, that's another bad thing. But we could also say, this does show up every once in a while, that it definitely benefits, we'll say benefits, producers. Because when you limit competition, now your domestic industries, your domestic car companies or your domestic whatever companies, they don't have as much competition, so they can make more money. Okay? But it's going to be a negative for consumers because we have less options. So I think that's important for us to know. So the benefits of free trade then would be the exact opposite. Does that make sense? Free trade promotes efficiency, it keeps prices down, and it's probably going to hurt producers because they won't make as much money. So I think that's important to know. Okay? Questions on that? All right. Moving on. Let's get to the balance of payments. I'm going to switch pages here. What are you laughing at, man? Yo, Ryan. No, just that they do all the opposite of what we said with barriers. But that's it. Okay? All right. Now, I'll be fairly quick with balance of payments. Main things we need to know is one, balance of payments is split up into two accounts. Okay? So we'll put two accounts. Account number one is the current account. And it is important for us to know what international transactions. Now, I probably should have said that right away. Balance of payments is an accounting system to track international transactions only. Not any transaction that you make in the U.S. is not going to impact the balance of payments. Any transaction that you make with another country will. So we're only tracking international transactions. Okay? The current account would include transactions on goods, services, Sorry, I can't. I don't know if I can erase it right now. That's a D. That make it better? Sure. Goods, services, and it should be income. Goods, services, and income. Okay? Goods, services, income. Those are our three transactions that when they happen between countries are counted in the current account. Your financial account is the second account. And the financial account is going to include transactions on stocks, bonds, bank accounts, and we'll say property, which would include buying a business in another country. Buying property or buying a business, we'll say, would all be counted in the financial account. Okay? And along with that, the financial account plus the current account is going to be equal to $0 over time. Now what that means is all dollars that are leaving a country are eventually going to come back into a country. Okay? All dollars that leave are going to eventually come back into the U.S. If they don't come back in the current account, then they must be coming back in the financial account. Which is why we say that if we have a, let's call it a current account deficit. Now, so on the same page here, a current account deficit, one drop, that was all I had. That means that there are more dollars leaving the U.S. There are more dollars leaving the U.S. than coming into the U.S. in those current account items, goods, services, and income. So if we are all, let's say, taking our income that we earn and we're sending it overseas to relatives, okay, that would be money leaving the U.S. And since it's income, it would fall in the current account, okay, and that could potentially create a current account deficit. More money leaving the U.S. than coming into the U.S. on those transactions. But if we have a current account deficit, then we must have a financial account surplus. And that means those dollars that are leaving are going to come back into the U.S. in our financial markets, like our stocks and bonds, or people outside the U.S. are going to be buying businesses in the U.S., or maybe they will be putting their money into our bank accounts, things like that. But there's more money coming in the U.S. in those financial accounts than leaving. That has to be happening if we have a current account deficit. Okay? Now, quick question. Are current account deficit and trade deficit the same thing? They are not. They could be. A current account deficit could also mean there's a trade deficit, but trade deficit is only measuring goods, imports and exports. Current account is measuring more than just goods, or balance of payments is measuring more than just the transaction of goods. So we should probably know that the trade balance, trade deficit, or trade surplus is just a portion of the balance of payments. It does not measure all the things that are included in the balance of payments. Okay? So hopefully that helps out just a little bit. Holy smokes. I'm rolling here, and I totally forgot that I got questions I want to go over. So let's, before we flip the page, let's take a look at multiple choice. Let's do 23 and 25. 23 and 25. 2016. 23, 25. We already did 23? Oh, great. Shh. Quiet, please. So the reason why I did already do 23, but let's just look at it one more time because it fits with the growth stuff we talked about. An increase in which of the following is most likely to increase employment and promote long-run growth? Now, as soon as I see that, promote long-run growth, I need land, labor, capital. I need one of those things. Okay? So that's important. And we even wrote down causes of growth. investment spending, technology, or human capital? I go here. We said the answer was A, right? Government spending on education. That is increasing the amount of human capital in the economy, which should then increase or promote growth. That's pretty typical economic growth question. If we look at 25, again, technological progress promotes long-run economic growth primarily by. Now, technological progress is just econ fancy for improving technology. That's it, right? We're just improving technology. And so the best answer there should be B, increasing labor productivity, which is what we put down. Okay? So I think that's important for us to know. All right, now let's take a look at, we already did 20, didn't we? Let's take a look at 51. We did not do 20? All right, stay there. Go to 20. Shh. We did, but I just want to highlight that again as well. So, with 20, just a reminder, okay, that that was an input comparative advantage problem. Input comparative advantage problem, which means input other under, IOU. Input other under. Output other over, oh yeah. Thank you, Brock. Input other under. So just know that the reason why I know that that's an input problem is when I look at the information I'm given, it's talking about the amount of hours needed to produce a unit of coffee. Okay? Hours needed to produce a unit of coffee. So that will help you out. Okay? All right, look at 51. Skip ahead, 51. I need to get this scratch out of my throat. Cold coffee from this morning. Yeah, it's disgusting. But sometimes when you got a tickle in your throat, you just got to man up. You just got to do it. I do. I got, you know. I don't do that usually. All right. So, looking at 51. This is a little bit different type of comparative advantage question or comparative absolute advantage question. Nations A and B produce only chairs and bikes. If each laborer in Nation A can produce twice as many chairs as each laborer in Nation B, then which of the following is necessarily true? Well, right there, hopefully I know that this is telling me that Nation A is like the United States and Nation B is like Canada, right? So we're, doubling Canada up with production. Shoot, I'm being recorded right now. So the answer probably is going to go back to the concept of absolute advantage. Who can outproduce the other country? So if you look at answer choice C, Nation A has an absolute advantage in chairs. Okay? Can we determine, listen to this, could you determine comparative advantage with the information you were given?
No.
No. You would need to know how many more bicycles they could produce as well, right? You got to have some info about bikes to make that decision, and we don't have that. So it had to be about absolute advantage. Questions at all? Anything? All right. Rolling on. Here we go. Flip that outline over. Woo! What? Sorry, man. All right. Foreign exchange market. Now, quick refresher. Couple things. Foreign exchange market is the market where currencies are exchanged. You need to think as if the foreign exchange market is a place that is outside of any country, Okay? Where the only money that's there are money that is supplied by individuals, and individuals from other countries are demanding. And this is why I say this, because sometimes we want to relate the money supply in the United States to the supply of dollars in the foreign exchange market, and we can't do that. Those are two completely different things. There's a money supply. That's the amount of money that's available in the U.S., but that is different than the supply of dollars in the foreign exchange market. Okay? How do dollars get to the foreign exchange market? People from the U.S. take their dollars there to exchange them for a different currency. And that's how the supply of dollars gets there or leaves, that they're being demanded. Okay? So I think it's important that we know that that is a different place. Okay? It's like a place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean where if you were going to go and travel, you need to stop at like the little foreign exchange boat, buoy, barge, whatever you want to call it. You got to swim there, okay? And then you got to make a pit stop, exchange your currency, and then finish the swim. Okay? So there you go. All right. Let's start with foreign exchange determinants. Determinants. Some people just won't know, Captain Lowe. All right. Four things. Four things. Trends. Interest rates. Inflation rates. Notice that the first one is interest rate. The second one is inflation rate. Those are different. Had a few people on the test Friday that read that wrong. Oh, that's a major no-no. Okay, you have to keep inflation and interest rates separate. Okay, separate. And just going and grading my current students Unit 7 tests this weekend, it reminds me of how careful you have to read all the questions that deal with foreign exchange. You just got to be careful. Read them closely. Slow down. Pump the brakes. Okay? Find the determinant. Okay? Our last determinant, is going to be income. Those are our four determinants. So let's talk first about what causes our currency to appreciate. I don't like it that big. So, what forces or causes a currency to appreciate? Listen. Okay? If we increase the trend, I don't know how to say that better. If something's more popular, then people want it, okay? Then that currency will appreciate. If we decrease, well, we'll stay in order. If we increase the inflation, interest rates. Increase interest rates. Decrease the inflation rates, or decrease the income. Those are the four things that would cause a currency to appreciate. Okay? I don't know if I can. I'm not even going to mess with that. Okay? So that's it. Trends, popularity, things like that. Yes, Ryan?
So, like, let's say the U.S., the income decreases in the U.S., so there's less money being put into the foreign exchange, so it's worth more there?
Correct.
Okay.
Let's go through. I actually have that down to go through an example. So just remember, and I'm going to graph just a second, but when you're looking at a foreign exchange graph, there are two ways that you can graph a currency appreciating. Okay? Those two ways are either we increase the dollar demand, or we decrease the dollar supply. Those are the two ways that you can graph currency appreciating. Increase the dollar demand or decrease the dollar supply. So your foreign exchange graph is going to look something like this. Okay? What? All right. Standard supply and demand. You just focus on me, man. Quantity, exchange rate. This is going to be the dollar market. So we'll put up here dollar market. You don't have to put dollar market, but for me, that just helps me keep straight of what it is that I'm doing. Okay? So if this is the dollar market, then I know that my label needs to be quantity of dollars. And up here, it needs to be foreign currency. We'll say it's the yen. The yen. Yen per dollar. Quick reminder, whatever goes on the bottom, which is quantity of dollars, has to match with whatever currency you're graphing. So I'm graphing the dollar market. So that means that quantity of dollars is on the bottom. And that means that on my vertical axis, dollar has to be in the bottom there as well. So dollar market, dollar goes in the bottom, dollar goes in the bottom up top. Okay? And this tells me the yen price per dollar. Really is what we're getting at. This is the yen price per dollar. So if the yen price per dollar is changing, then the dollar is either going to gain value or lose value. Okay? So let's just say in our example, let's say that, let's say we have an increase in interest rates in the U.S. When interest rates increase in the country, people from outside that country are going to want to save in the country with the highest interest rates. So that means that the dollar in this scenario is going to be demanded in the foreign exchange market. Anyone that wants to get that higher interest rate is going to need to exchange their money, demand dollars, right? And then save in our banks. So on our graph, in the dollar market, we would increase the demand for dollars. And that shows me then that the yen price per dollar is increasing, and that means that the dollar has gained value. The dollar would be appreciating here. Question, Eric, sorry. Shh. Great question. I'm going to do that one next for my next example. Okay? All right. Second example. Any questions on this example at all? Interest rate goes up. That currency is always demanded. Interest rate goes up. That currency is always demanded. Whichever currency is demanded always appreciates. Whichever currency is demanded always appreciates. Brock.
On your graph, on the y-axis, is that an E?
Yes, that's an E for exchange rate. Okay?
What's that?
What's what?
Like per dollar? What is
Yen per dollar.
that?
Yen. That's the currency that we're using right now. Yen per dollar. Sorry. All right. Second example. Okay? Let's say that there's a decrease in income levels in the U.S. Income levels falling in the U.S. So here we go. Let's figure out what's going to happen. I'm graphing the dollar market again. Try to stay focused, people. All right, exchange rate, quantity. Now we're saying this is the dollar market, so this needs to be quantity of dollars. This is my demand curve, supply curve, and up top, same thing. yen per dollar. Yen per dollar. When you are graphing for the free response portion of the exam, okay, this is going to be next week Thursday, second part of the exam you're going to take. You need to make, next week Wednesday, you need to make sure that you are labeling all of your, each axis, each curve, and your equilibriums. Every equilibrium should have dotted lines just like I have here, showing where your starting point is and where your ending point is. Okay? Everything needs to be labeled. And make sure, take a little bit of time to draw them so that way they look good. Okay? Because this is your only chance really to get college credit. And if some of you draw them like you do for me on the tests, you can do better. Okay? Just make sure they're legible. Make sure they're legible. You got plenty of space. Use the space. Don't try to squeeze it into a little, 1 inch by 1 inch box and make the people having to grade it haul out a magnifying glass. You don't want to make those people mad. Okay? Make it so you can read it. Brock. Yeah, no, this is still 4. Still 4. Okay? Okay, now, listen. When income levels and increase in the U.S. fall, income levels are falling, we have less money. We are going to spend less, which means we are going to buy less from our trading partners. So if we're trading with Japan, let's say, okay, we have less money, so we're not going to buy as many, Japanese goods, which means we are going to demand less Japanese currency. Anytime you demand less foreign currency, you supply less of your own. And so on this graph, in this scenario, this is probably the trickiest scenario that causes currency to appreciate. We have less money. We supply less in the foreign exchange market, so the supply curve shifts left. And then you can see that the exchange rate increases and the dollar is actually appreciating. So when we buy less from our trading partners, we exchange less of our currency, causing the value of our currency to actually increase. Ryan.
So the label that you have for the excess being quantity in dollars,
Correct.
is that always quantity in dollars demanded and supplied for the amount in?
Great question. So that's the amount that's being supplied in the foreign exchange market and the amount that's being demanded in the foreign exchange market. So if we're supplying less, we're assuming there's less available, and so the price rises. If we're demanding more, we're taking more away, which then causes the price or value to go up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it never means that the exact amount that's in the market.
No.
It's just what is being supplied.
Right. Yep. Carolyn. Shh. Great question. If income in Japan fell, the way that I would look at that is I would say they're going to buy less of our stuff, so the demand for the dollar then would decrease. Does that make sense? Causing our currency to depreciate. They're supplying less yen, so their currency appreciates. Does that make sense? And I didn't mention this. Whenever the dollar is appreciating, the foreign currency that we're comparing it to then must be depreciating, right? They're always opposite each other. So I think that's important to know. Alyssa. You would know by what determinant you're given. Okay, so if you're given the determinant with interest rates, then just know that higher interest rate, that currency is going to be demanded. But if it's income, that's the one goofy scenario where then you're going to, supply more or less of your currency. Yeah, only one. Okay? Only one that in my head changes supply first. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, real quick, just looking back, all of these factors cause the dollar or currency to appreciate. So the opposite, and I'm not going to write them all down, okay, just to save some time, but the opposite of all of these causes the currency to depreciate then. Does that make sense? So when interest rates fall, that currency is not demanded, so it is going to lose value. It would depreciate. Okay? Or when income levels go up in an economy, we're going to buy more foreign goods because we have more money, so we're going to demand more of their currency and supply more of our own. Okay, remember the pattern when it comes to your foreign exchange graphs? If one currency is demanded, the other currency must be supplied. If one currency is not demanded, the other currency is not going to be supplied. Okay, and that's really the pattern that you can stick to with your two currencies. Brock.
So just to clarify, an increasing demand and decreasing supply.
Correct. Yep. And then a decrease in demand and an increase in supply lead to a currency depreciating. Okay? Great question. Anything else? Okay. I'm skipping down to number 5 now. Okay? Number 5, if let's say that the dollar appreciates. Anytime a currency appreciates, we need to know how that's going to influence trade. Okay? So what we would say is that when the dollar appreciates, imports will always increase while exports will always fall. And we call that combination a trade deficit. So, if you can put this all together, when a currency appreciates, that causes a trade deficit. Now, there's been some confusion about this. Okay? I am not saying that a trade deficit causes a currency to appreciate. Everybody hear that?
Yeah.
I am not saying that a trade deficit causes a currency to appreciate. If there's a trade deficit, you need to figure out, whose currency is being demanded. Probably a foreign currency. Okay? But what I'm saying is that when a currency appreciates, that causes a trade deficit. And here's the reason why. If the dollar has gained value, your dollar will buy more foreign currency. Therefore, you are going to be more willing to buy more foreign goods or more imports. Okay? But in a foreign country, or the people holding the foreign currency, their currency has depreciated, and so they're not going to buy as much U.S. stuff because it would take more of their currency to the U.S. Okay? So just know that every time a currency appreciates, it will cause a trade deficit. Imports will go up, exports will go down. Okay, and that combination increases AD, increases real GDP, and increases price level. Now, the two statistics I just get from the increase in aggregate demand. Every time AD goes up, price level and GDP go up.
Wouldn't it be decreasing?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Wow. Decrease AD. Just keeping everybody on their toes, that's all. Decrease real GDP. At least we know Ryan's ready for this. And decrease price level. So now that is opposite the way most students want to think. Usually we think a currency is appreciating, so all things must be good. No, the only thing that's good when your currency appreciates is you can buy more foreign goods for less dollars. But in our own economy, other countries will buy less of our stuff, which causes those things to all decrease. Questions? So then we would know, I'm not going to put this down, but when the dollar depreciates or a currency depreciates, all of those, stay focused, all of those would be opposite. Okay? Got it? Which would mean that the dollar depreciating would create a trade surplus. More exports than imports in that scenario. Okay? Questions at all? Okay. I have a number 6 on here. All I was really going to tell you is when we are given an example about fiscal or monetary policy and how that's going to influence the value of a dollar, just know that a question has to pick one of our determinants. Let me give you an example. I think we need to look at question 12. 2016, question 12. I believe. Okay. So let's take a look. Question 12, 2016 exam. The implementation of an expansionary monetary policy by the Canadian Central Bank will result in which of the following changes in the short run? Okay? Now, when you use an expansionary monetary policy, that changes a whole bunch of variables in an economy. Okay? But this question wants to know, how is that policy going to influence the interest rates in that economy? And then how does the interest rate impact the value of their currency? So the interest rate is going to be the determinant. Okay? So hopefully we know anytime an expansionary monetary policy is used, it doesn't matter what country it is, they're putting more money in the economy, and that would cause the interest rates in that economy to fall. Okay? And then I go to my trusty brain, and I say, okay, I memorized this. Every time an interest rate falls, that currency will not be demanded. People won't want to save there. That currency will not be demanded, so it's going to lose value. So it would be decrease, decrease, I believe, or decrease, depreciate would be the answer. Questions? Brian?
Can you explain again why the interest rate goes down?
Yes. All right, listen up. When an expansionary monetary policy is used, that is fancy for that Federal Reserve is putting more money in the economy. So you would use your money market graph, okay? And on the money market graph, you shift the supply curve right, and that would cause the interest rate to fall. Okay? Expansionary monetary policy always puts more money in, rates fall. Contractionary is the opposite. Okay? Yeah? Okay. All right. Maybe Ryan's not ready. I'm kidding. All right, let's take a look. I got a couple more questions while we're here. Let's take a look at 19. 19. When a trade deficit, or when country A has a trade deficit, which of the following is necessarily true? Okay, now, this is not asking what caused the trade deficit, saying what's true because there's a trade deficit. Now remember, trade deficit means that we are importing more than we're exporting. That would be trade deficit by definition. Okay, so I look at my answer choices, and oh, by golly, B is like word for word textbook definition of trade deficit right there. Okay? Country X's imports exceed the value of its exports. That's it. Okay? Let's take a look at another one. Let's look at 22. Okay, now 22 says, which of the following would lead to an increase in United States net exports? Okay? Well, an increase in net exports is the opposite of what we just had here. Okay? When imports increase and exports decrease, that's a decrease in net exports. Okay? Because net exports, remember, is always exports minus imports. So if we want an increase in net exports, we know what leads to that is the dollar depreciating. So now I got to figure out, which of the following would cause the dollar to depreciate, or if the answer says that, oh, there it is, C. Depreciation of the U.S. dollar. When the dollar loses value, we'll buy less, they will buy more, our net exports increase. Questions on that at all? All right. Oh, we got to look at this. Last one. 45. Last one. This was similar to the one that Ryan was asking questions about earlier, I think 12 maybe. Again, deals with a policy and exchange rates or trade. Okay? So, we have we got an open economy, flexible exchange rate system. That just means that exchange rates can change. An increase in a country's government budget deficit would most likely cause, okay? Whenever we see that a country's budget is changing, we need to know that that is going to change interest rates in that economy. It's going to change the loanable funds graph, okay? So a budget deficit means that that government's going to have to borrow more money in the loanable funds, which would cause the interest rate to go up. So that is my determinant that I'm looking at, okay? Increase in interest rates. Now I got to figure out, well, what's going to be the cause, or what will happen because of that, because it would likely cause. And I believe that A, B, and C have to be out because we know the interest rates are going to go up. D, increase in interest rate and an increase in domestic investment. That's just business spending. But remember, at the beginning of the night tonight, we said that low interest rates encourage investment spending, so that's out, right? Because that doesn't jive. An increase in interest rate does not jive with an increase in domestic investment. So D's out. So then E, an increase in real interest rates is going to cause the value of currency to go up, and when the value of currency goes up, net exports will fall, which is what we have right here. So I'm back here again. So this is important for us to know how exchange rates determine trade. It's going to show up a couple times on the AP exam. Okay? How exchange rates determine trade. Questions? Whew! It's cold in here. I'm kidding. Kidding. All right. Thank goodness for almost summer, right? All right. Let's take a look at the graph sheet. Graph sheet. Here we go. Notice on one side of the graph sheet is a whole bunch of formulas. Okay? Unfortunately, on the AP exam, these are not given to you. They need to be stored in your trusty brain. Okay? Store it in there. You only got to have it in there for like 2 hours. After that, you can forget them. Okay? All right. Now I'm going to go down the graph. I'm going down the graph side. Okay? Starting with production possibility graph. Here we go. This is graph where you have you're showing what you can produce of different goods. So we'll just say we have good X and good Y, and your production possibility curve is going to look something like this, or something like this. Now just know that is not a demand curve. That is not a demand curve. That is a production possibility graph showing constant costs. Okay? If it was a demand curve, I had to put price and quantity up there. Production possibility, you put each good on each axis. It does not matter which axis you put it on unless the FRQ question says specifically to label a certain way. Okay? Put it wherever you want. And remember, you can use this along with a comparative advantage table, right? We could say that, we could produce, 10 of good X and 5 of good Y. Then we could have another, line on here that's like this, let's say, and that would be, 8 of good X, and 5 of good Y still. And so we could take that information for 2 countries and put it on a comparative advantage table. But this represents all the possible combinations that an economy can use its resources to produce 2 goods. Okay? And when we gain one good, we're going to give up the other good. We'll call that the cost. Okay? And that's what we use this graph for. Okay? All right, moving on. Supply and demand. Highly unlikely that you have to draw this on a FRQ. But just remember, demand of the land, supply of the sky. This is quantity, this is price. And it's really just the supply and demand for one specific good. Pizza, popcorn, pop, Cheez-Its, Cheetos, mini Oreos. Those are so good, by the way. Put them in a cup, fill the cup up with milk, and then eat them with a spoon. And then repeat. All right. Price. No. Pour them in, baby. Wrong. All right. Wrong. Not possible. All right. Moving on. Aggregate supply, aggregate demand. Aggregate supply, aggregate demand. Again, now this is aggregate demand, this is SRAS, and this is LRAS. The different labels here, remember, are your aggregate curves. This is going to be real GDP, and this is going to be price level. And we always label this with a Y for output. Okay? Yes? Just price and quantity, yep. And then price level with aggregate supply, aggregate demand. Okay? Price level, real GDP. Now, just so we understand this, when you are graphing this for an FRQ, you will not need to move that LRAS curve. Please don't do that. Okay? I still see occasionally a question talks about the economy adjusting to long-run equilibrium, and we want to move the LRAS. That's not going to happen. Okay? The LRAS is going to stay where it's at. It's like a measuring stick. You will move the SRAS or the aggregate demand to adjust back to long-run equilibrium. Do not move the LRAS. Use it as a measuring stick to see how your economy is doing compared to full employment output. Okay, that's what we do. Questions on this? All right, let's go down to money market. This is the graph that determines our money supply. Okay? So we have a demand curve. This is the demand for money as cash. Hear that? That's important. It's the demand for money as cash. Not how much money you want altogether. We know everybody wants a lot of money. It's how much money you want to hold just in cash. Okay? It's important for us to know. And then we have a vertical supply curve. Interest rate, quantity of money, and this is the nominal interest rate here. Nominal interest rate. Oh, sorry. It's quantity of money on the bottom. I didn't realize that my advertising was in the way. So, demand for money is cash. Supply curve is vertical because it is controlled by the Federal Reserve. Okay? Go back to last week. Monetary policy tools, which would be discount rate, reserve requirement, and open market operations. Those are the 3 tools that shift that supply of money. They dictate how much money is in the money supply. So expansionary monetary policy is just fancy for put more money in the economy. That's going to shift the supply curve right. Contractionary is fancy for take money out. And that would shift the supply curve to the left and then change the interest rate. Questions on money market? This graph represents all the money that is available in the economy. It's the supply of money. Okay? And of that money, how much people want to hold as cash. That is what that graph represents. All right, rolling on. Loanable funds are really fun. Loanable funds market. This is just another market for money, but it's a traditional supply and demand curve. Again, this is the quantity of money. But now we use the real interest rate. The real interest rate on the loanable funds graph. Now, this is the graph where people go to borrow money. Okay? And a lot of times on AP questions, the government goes here to borrow money. Okay? I would say that the government, in the AP questions that we deal with, the government is the most frequent borrower. Okay? And so that means when the government's borrowing, that demand curve is going to be shifting to the right and pushing up interest rates. Okay? So this demand curve represents how much money, or the demand for borrowing. So how much money people want to borrow. Okay? The supply curve represents how much money people want to save in the economy. Okay? One thing that some of you may have forgotten is that supply curve can be influenced by other countries. If other countries want to save in our banks, the supply of loanable funds is going to increase. Okay? They're saving in our bank, it's increasing. If other countries have higher interest rates, then we will want to save in other countries' banks, so then the supply of money would decrease. Okay? If you were thinking about numbers, like quantity, like a dollar value of how much money, the money market includes all the money in the economy. The loanable funds market is just including, of all the money in the economy, how much of that money we want to borrow and how much of that money we want to save. So it would be a smaller quantity because we don't want to save everything. Does that make sense? So sometimes it helps students kind of put things in perspective of what it is that we're really measuring with our two money graphs. Okay? Questions on this? All right. Mr. Phillips curve. This guy's got to go. His graph, I'll be honest, his graph sucks. It's the graph that we teach that has like zero actual relevance. You probably think the whole class is like that, but for me as an econ teacher, I get really, really irritated by this graph. So the rest of it I guess I can make sense of. All right, so our Phillips curve. We are showing the relationship between inflation and unemployment. Oops. And it looks like a demand curve, but it's not a demand curve. It's the Sir Phillips curve, SRPC, Sir Phillips curve. And the vertical curve is our Lord Phillips curve, long run Phillips curve. I don't know where that came from. Sir Phillips curve, Lord Phillips curve, but that's it, okay? Now remember that in the short run, and there always seems to be a question about this, okay? In the short run, this curve is downward sloping, and that indicates that there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the short run. If you want lower inflation, this makes sense, lower inflation, be prepared for more unemployment. If you want less unemployment, be prepared for more inflation. That's the trade-off that we're referring to. And I always seem to find a question almost every year that really is that concept word for word. What does the Short-Run-Phillips curve represent? Or which curve represents the trade-off between inflation and unemployment? Short-Run-Phillips curve, something like that. Okay? So hopefully that can be a home run, slam dunk, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
So determinants for this is where like an increase in demand would actually be a decrease along the curve.
Correct. So the determinants are a change in demand, move along your short Phillips curve in the opposite direction. Change in SRAS, move the entire Phillips curve in the opposite direction. Okay? And again, you're not going to move the long run Phillips curve. That is a measuring stick. Okay? This represents where our inflation rate is when we have 5% or 4 to 6% unemployment is really what that represents. Okay? We went over comparative advantage chart today, scratch, and foreign exchange. You need me to graph it again? My brain hurts. All right. There we go. Signing out.